Hello, everybody, and happy Saturday. You made it to the weekend, and it is gorgeous outside. At least if you're on the East Coast of America, it is super, super gorgeous outside today. So I hope you guys are really soaking it in and enjoying it. And I wanted to come and talk about a blog post I wrote this week, which was, a really popular topic, and it got circulated in a lot of places, so I can tell that it's really kind of resonating with a lot of people, and so I really wanted to kind of share what I was talking about there, which has to do with taking kind of depression or really any kind of difficult emotional experience, and taking that on as your identity. So I wanted to kind of start with a funny story, which is not about depression directly. It's just, but it draws kind of a parallel for the point that I want to be making in this live today. So I want to, tell you about when I was moving into the apartment that I live in now, the one that you see here. And you can see it. Well, actually, it's really messy. I was going to show you around. I'm like, it's a little bit kind of crazy and out of control. But you can see it's like all plants and like very kind of Caitlin kind of a space, very floral. There's an altar over there that you may or may not be able to see the edge of. Very like floral and plants and beautiful. And when I was moving in, I, had never moved into a place that I knew I really was going to stay in for several years ever before in my life. My life has always been on the road. I've always been moving to a new city or a new country or, constantly. I think since the time that I was 18 years old, I've lived in literally a different city every single year since I was 18 years old. So a lot of moving. So I never had this mentality of like, I'm permanently moving into a space. But, I turned 30 and I was moving into this space that I really intended to kind of ground into and have a home in. And so I wanted help designing it in a way that would kind of really resonate with me and my personality and my style and, a place that I would love to come home to and like feel at home in. And so I felt like super, super, super anxious. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about design. I have no idea like what my style is, what I even would want it to look like. Like, I have no idea how to go about design. Like, do you do designing an apartment? Like, how do you choose a rug? How do you make sure the furniture matches? How do you do, like, so much anxiety and confusion and a lot of like low self-esteem around it, right? Like thinking like, I'm not a big girl. I don't know how to do this, like all this kind of stuff. And so I really was like feeling anxious about it. And I remember talking to a friend who's a designer, and she started asking me a bunch of questions. She was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you your home design style, your kind of interior design style, so that you feel a lot more clarity about how to design your apartment. It's going to make you feel much better because then you're going to be able to look for things that match your personality. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Thank you. And so she asked me a few questions, kind of like, like what kind of feeling I prefer, what kind of color schemes I like. She showed me a few places, whatever. And then she was like, okay, so your style is bohemian chic. That's your interior design style. That's your interior design identity, if you will. And I remember when she originally told me that, I felt so much relief because I went home and I started Googling and like, interior design, bohemian chic. And I found a lot of things that I loved and that resonated with me and that I thought were beautiful and all this kind of stuff, right? And so it was really empowering to have just like kind of a clear diagnosis of what my interior design style was, until all of a sudden it wasn't. And what happened was I was, on this website, trying to put together like what a hypothetical living room would look like, and I found something, a couch that I really liked, and they were saying, no, you can't have that. It doesn't go with your style. Like, that doesn't fit into the room that you're trying to design, or the energy of bohemian chic. And then, like, same thing happened again. I went back to that friend of mine, and I was like, I passed this this boutique near my house, and I saw this really, really cool, like, wall fixture, and I want to put it in. And she's like, no, but that doesn't go with the other bohemian chic things that you've already chosen and selected, so you're not going to be able to do that. And all of a sudden I felt like really limited, like, oh no, now I have this, like, this one bohemian chic identity, and if I take anything else that's not exactly in that identity, it's not going to look good, it's not going to feel good, it's going to feel all over the place, it's going to feel messy, it's going to feel this, it's going to feel that. And it felt like all of a sudden this thing that was originally liberating, because it helped lead me to some answers and some clarity, all of a sudden was incredibly limiting and confusing and frustrating, right? And so I know that seems like a really random story to tell, but in fact it's exactly the story, or a very parallel story, to the experience I had when I was originally diagnosed with depression, right? So when I was originally diagnosed with depression, I'm going to put you guys over here so there's some better sunlight coming in to this light. So when I was originally diagnosed with depression, it was kind of the same thing. I had all of these symptoms going on, meaning my motivation was tanking. Like, it didn't feel like doing all these things I used to want to do anymore, right? My just overall energy levels were super low. Everything felt like it was an incredible amount of energy for me to invest in whatever I wanted to do, right? Didn't really feel like being involved with any of my friendships or relationships, right? So I gained a lot of weight, like 25 pounds in a few months, right? So a lot of those things were, they were a collection of symptoms that I was experiencing. Didn't know why all of a sudden kind of my mental and emotional and physical health were all tanking, and so when obviously I was only 14 when I first started going through all this, so naturally my parents were like really concerned, and my mom took me to a psychologist and got me diagnosed with depression. And I think for a few moments that was so liberating to be like, hey, here's this disease or disorder that's taken over, right? And it's taken over my mind and my body. So A, I'm not at fault. I'm not a bad person for having all these things. And B, more importantly, I have, the exact, path to treatment, right? All I have to do is take a few antidepressants and go to talk therapy and work through my stuff, and it's all going to be fine, and I'll be better, and I'll be able to get back to life, right? And so it was that same, really fulfilling clarity that you get when I was told that I'm a bohemian chic interior design style, right? And so it was the same kind of okay, great, now I know where to look, now I know what to do. And so it was really liberating. And I think that anyone who's ever experienced any health issue, mental or physical, or and of course they're all both, but it's always so empowering when we finally get a diagnosis, because then we feel like we know exactly how to treat it. But this live stream is actually about telling you guys that the opposite is actually the much more healthy approach to take, right? So I got this diagnosis of depression, and they said, okay, here's the path, right? And the most kind of proven pathway, so to speak, is a combination of therapy with antidepressants, right? But unfortunately for me, and for so many people, the antidepressants didn't really work. And trust me, I tried every single antidepressant, SSRI, SNRI, and combined it with anxiety medication, combined it with this. I mean, we did every single one of those medications, but those medications really didn't really profoundly change the chemistry of my body, and therefore the quality of my thoughts, because it wasn't really just a kind of chemical imbalance that I had in my brain, which is excuse my language, the bullshit story that everybody tells, that why we're all depressed is it's just a chemical imbalance in our brain. It has nothing else to do with anything else. So that didn't really work, right? The talk therapy, of course, worked a little bit, in the sense it was really powerful and healthy to have a safe space for me to be able to have conversations around my experience and to talk about those. So that was helpful to have that safe space, but it didn't profoundly change everything that was going on inside me. Honestly, it just didn't. So what happened was that identity then became this incredibly painful thing, because the path to healing that identity, right, the path to healing that disease wasn't working for me. So then I was like, oh my God, now it's even worse. Now, I must be more screwed up than any individual in the world if this stuff works for everybody else and it's not working for me. Well, of course, little did I know at the time, because there's so much stigma around mental health, that it doesn't work for most people, or at least most people that I've met. It might it might make things, again, a little bit better, a little bit more bearable, but it certainly does not heal your heart and make you in love with your life again, right? And I think most people I've ever met can agree with that, right? And at the time, they said, okay, well, you're depressed. Here's the path to treatment. Treatment didn't work on me, so I literally thought I was going to die. And, I've talked it again before and in past blog posts about how, why I went to end my life and, wrote that suicide note and did all of that kind of stuff, because I really, really did think this is the end of my life. Treatment's not working and this is my identity. Also, I got sucked into that identity, right? They say when somebody's depressed, they should not be able to do this thing alone. When somebody's depressed, they should not be able to do this. When somebody's depressed, you have to, and it's not nothing positive. It's nothing to say, hey, when somebody's depressed, they're more deeply empathetic and they can relate to people in an even more powerful way. Or when somebody's depressed, that is a really amazing opportunity for them to get to know their bodies in a totally different way, because there's seriously some imbalances going on there, right? Nobody says any of that stuff. Everybody only says when somebody's depressed, they shouldn't be alone, or when somebody's depressed, they shouldn't have to, they shouldn't be able to, drink too much, or they shouldn't be able. It's all about like what you should not be able to do. You shouldn't be able to travel or study abroad or whatever, because what happens if you can't handle it? And so that's what it became. My diagnosis, which at first was this empowering thing of, oh, that's why I have such low motivation, and that's why I don't feel like doing the things I used to want to do, then became, hey, this is now who I am as a person, and it's even worse because the typical treatment path isn't working, and here's all these things I can't do, I shouldn't want to do, and that is going to be wrong with me the rest of my life because this is a part of who I am. And honestly, it just was incredibly counter to healing, because every thought I had in my mind about who I was then became, I'm a depressed person, so that's what this means in life, and that is never an empowering way to think or feel, right? And so much of all healing, again, mental, physical, it doesn't matter, comes from being able to believe that it's possible to heal, believe that you still have strengths in you, believe that you have the capacity to move forward and be resilient despite how difficult it is, right? So much of healing is about being able to at least have some level of hope. And again, for anyone who's ever struggled with depression or knows someone who struggled with depression, it's hard to get that motivation as it is, because your biochemistry is really messed up. And so it's not producing a lot of dopamine and other those natural kind of happy and motivational hormones. So there has to be something deeper within, right? Some belief, something that you're hearing outside of you and inside of you all the time that's reminding you that you're at least capable and that this is possible, right? And having the diagnosis of depression, you're depressed, don't do this, you're depressed, so be careful about this, you're depressed about this, just did not make me feel better, didn't make me feel empowered, didn't make me feel hopeful, and more importantly, it shut down my curiosity. It said, okay, all these people healed from this, all these people healed from talk therapy or medication, or at least that's what they tell you, because that's how they keep making money in the pharmaceutical industry. All these people heal from this, right? But Caitlin, you can't heal from this, so maybe you need more medication, maybe you need a different medication, but that was it. It shut down my curiosity to think that there could ever be anything else that caused my depression, right? And so I wanted to just talk to you guys about, like, keeping your curiosity open. I think being open to the idea of, yeah, like, I will look at like depression as this kind of collection of symptoms, but not as this kind of card of fate, which has decided who I am, what I'm capable of, and the way I need to heal, right? Because then if that doesn't work for you, it's going to feel really crappy. And for so many people, it doesn't work because depression happens for a myriad of reasons, right? So in my own story, I'll first tell you about my own story, what were the kind of some of the major kind of causes, I think, of why depression came on, and then kind of give you that as a diagnosis, or not as a prognostic tool for you to start thinking about, hey, beyond just a brain chemical imbalance, what might be the reason that I and struggling with kind of depressive symptoms, right? So for my own self, and again, through only pushing myself out of that world and eventually getting into my own real studies about mental and physical health by myself and spending years and years and years training all over the globe to really understand it all, I started to learn a few things, right? So number one, I learned that how much our diet matters in terms of our body's ability to create serotonin, dopamine, GABA, a lot of the hormones and neurotransmitters that are associated with depression, right? And so when I finally decided to go to the doctor and get a nutrient panel done, and again, I had gotten this done a million times by my doctor in the past just for basic health, but never had my actual GP talk to my mental health practitioner and made this connection, right? So when I went to go to get my own nutrient panel done, I learned that I was incredibly and insanely low on vitamin D and vitamin B. And so apparently that had always kind of been the case, but they had never said, oh, hey, here's the link to depression. Let us, your GP talk to your psychiatrist or your psychologist. Had they talked, maybe they would have been able to make that connection. But honestly, so many doctors are not even trained in, and so many psychiatrists are not even trained in anything related to nutrition that I don't even know if they would have made that connection. But now it's really, really, really well documented in evidence that low vitamin D is extremely highly linked to not being able to produce all of those, like I said, those happy chemicals that we need in our brain to help create kind of happiness, contentment, joy, positivity, all that kind of stuff, and regulate fear and anxiety and all that stuff. Right? So vitamin D, and my doctor literally said to me, Caitlin, I have never met someone who is as low in vitamin D as you are. You are chronically low in vitamin D, right? So my body, it didn't matter what drugs I was taking. I might have taken something and for like a second it might have spiked something in my brain, but it was not fixing this underlying issue of, hey, my body literally cannot produce and sustain that level of happiness, or happy chemicals and all that kind of stuff. Like, it just couldn't do it, right? And so imagine the amount of money I was spending on antidepressants and all that kind of stuff when vitamin D and vitamin B also were. Vitamin B was a little less low, but it's as important, especially for your nervous system, especially for the kind of anxious side of depression. I was really, really low in both of those. So I started a diet which was really, really heavy in vitamin D and vitamin B, both in terms of supplements as well as food. And that made a much bigger difference to my depressive symptoms than anything else, right? Some other things I learned related to the nutrition angle was also around my body's reactivity to dairy. And so, I know that there's a lot of people who get really frustrated with the vegan movement or other food movements because, they think that there are all these fancy health trends or whatever. And, to each their own, believe what you want to believe. All I know is that I want to eat the things that are healthiest for my body to support my my mind and my mental state all the time. And I had an inflammatory reaction to dairy. I only found that out through taking a very special test. If anybody wants to know, you can PM me and I'll send you the link. But I found out I had an inflammatory reaction to that and a few other foods. And again, when I started taking those out of my diet, it made a huge, 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 huge difference. So all I want to say is diet makes, I believe, probably one of the biggest differences in the struggle with depression. And if you're taking if you're taking antidepressants, not only do they not address that underlying issue of whatever kind of micronutrients you might be lacking or missing, but moreover, there's a ton of evidence coming out now that they actually destroy your gut bacteria and your gut's ability to produce and help to break down food from which it produces those chemicals in the first place. For those of you who don't know, 90% of serotonin is created in the gut. 90%, not, that's not a small amount. So imagine 90% is created in your gut, and what antidepressants do is actually kill a lot of the gut bacteria and stop your body from being able to therefore break down food and create all the serotonin that you deeply need and that your body can make by itself. It absolutely can make by itself. So nutrition is a really, really huge piece of it. And again, had I just been like in this identity of depression where nobody ever talks about nutrition, I never would have known that, right? So that's a really huge thing. Another huge factor was about my environment, right? And again, I've talked about this before. I think like my family are good people, wonderful people, and just like, but like super just different values than I have like in an incredible way. And I think, you know, again, I don't believe in the narrative that like we're all screwed up because, you know, our parents have messed us up and blah blah blah. I think we have the parents that we're meant to have, meaning they love us and they challenge us in ways that are going to help us grow and develop. But because my parents were very different than me, and so were my siblings for that matter, I always felt really alone. I always felt really isolated. Love felt really insecure. And so there was just a lot of feelings of separateness. And again, now there's that, and that developed as my mentality and my belief that like I'm separate, I'm not good enough, I'm different, it's not okay, it's not safe to be loved, all that kind of stuff. And that creates like in your brain a deep survival threat. And so my brain and body were constantly in this kind of like survival mode where it was acting to these stresses as if a tiger was chasing me. And you can imagine if you spend the first 20 years of your life running from a tiger, or in the mentality and energy that you're running from a tiger, you're going to be exhausted, you're going to be overwhelmed, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be a lot of things, right? So of course that biology caught up with me and left me just exhausted and unmotivated and, you know, totally depressed, right? So there's a lot of research that shows that, like, you know, your inability to feel a deep connection or feel a safe and loving connection with the people who raised you really can contribute to experiences of depression, right? So look at that part of your life, right? Another huge thing is if you actually are surrounded by people who are depressed, right? So if you grew up with parents who maybe were very similar to you, but who struggled with anxiety or depression or other mental health issues themselves, then hey, guess what? They too, can influence you in that way, because, you know, that's the way you learn how to think about things. That's the way you learn how to process things. If you don't see your parents highly motivated, or if you see them kind of aloof, or just kind of in a funk all the time, that is a pattern you will subconsciously learn and embody and pick up on, right? So that could be a key into where this all came from. You know, there's so many reasons why kind of depression comes around. Of course, there's trauma, right? And again, trauma is this huge bodily thing. It's, you know, your body picks up this experience, and it's so intensely profound, just this one experience, that it can incredibly change your biochemistry, and your body holds on to that particular memory because, again, it's trying to protect you, it's trying to keep you safe. But it's gathering and it's remembering this memory more than anything else, because it wants you to be prepared. God forbid it would ever come again. It wants you to stay physically alive. It does not care about your mental health. It does want you to stay physically alive, right? So if you went through trauma, that's something you're going to have to get out of your body and really work through and deeply ground into a sense of safety again in your life. No antidepressant is going to make that go away. None. It's just what it is, right? And then, you know, there's a lot of other factors around kind of micro stressors or negative thought patterns, negative belief patterns. And I'm not going to go in here into a huge kind of overall diagnostic protocol of all the reasons that depression happens on a mind body, on a soul body, on a mind level, on a soul level, or on a body level. But really it can happen, and it does happen, because of many, many, many different factors. And if you just accept this is my identity and therefore this is the way it's treated, and if the treatment path doesn't work, this is where the story closes, then that's not really going to get you very far in treating your depression in a way that is actually going to empower you to be more healthy, more happy, more fulfilled, more self-aware, more self-compassionate than ever before, right? And I thank God every day for the experience that I went through. And the experience I went through was terrible. I mean 8 years of having to literally push myself out of the bed. Literally push myself out of bed. And of course there were many days and sometimes even weeks at a time where I didn't want to do that. And yet still, today, I now know, and I'm in my 30s now, and I have so many years left of my life, and I can't imagine having lived all of these years of my life from the kind of unconscious, unaware perspective of what really drives deep fulfillment, of what really creates a healthy body, of what really keeps my mind incredibly, incredibly high energized and happy and joyful and fulfilled, right? Of knowing all of the relationships, people, communication styles, career, food, exercise that is optimized for me and my life and my well-being. I never would have known any of that had I not gone through depression, right? So I used it as a map rather than an identity, a fixed identity with a fixed solution. I used it as a map to say, hey, how can I start to explore these symptoms and look at all aspects of my life and see where they can be changed in order to kind of open up the next door on this path to healing, right? And it was so much more liberating to say, hey, when I'm in this situation, I feel more depressed. Well, maybe that's a map. Maybe that's a key for me to say, these kinds of situations are not for me. Or what kind of thoughts or negative beliefs does this situation bring up? Or, hey, these kinds of food makes me feel more depressed the next day. Great, what could that be doing, right? Or this kind of exercise makes me feel better. And sometimes there's exercise that makes you feel worse, right? So similarly, for every kind of treatment that you go through, and you can treat depression in many, many ways, but it's really important that you look at your symptoms as a map, as an opening to understanding more about you, more about your life, more about your needs in terms of food, relationships, job, career, lifestyle, communication, etc., rather than a finite kind of diagnosis of what is wrong with you, what you're not able to do, how you have to limit yourself, and how you have to be fixed by some chemical, right? I do not find that to be an empowering solution because it really just closes the door on so much more wisdom and love that you can get if you treat your depression as a map to fulfillment instead. So I recently created this guide, which is called Essential Oils for Depression. Thank you, Amy, for saying for your amen. I'm so glad you agree, and I'm sure you've had a relevant experience. So I would love to hear about that, and feel free to share here, guys. But I see that there's a bunch of you guys watching and lurking, so it's always really vulnerable for me to talk about this kind of stuff and depression. So I really always appreciate the amens and the love showers and the hearts and the likes. So thank you guys so much for sharing that as I speak. It really means a lot. But as I was saying, I recently created this document, this PDF called Essential Oils for Depression. And what it does is it doesn't say, hey, you're depressed, here's the 3 essential oils you can use. No, that would be the same thing as, hey, you're depressed, here's the Zoloft because it's the best thing, or here's Wellbutrin because it's the best thing, or here's whatever because it's the best thing. I'm not going to do that because that would be the same thing as saying this is your identity and this is the only way to possibly solve that one fixed identity, right? Instead, what I do with my clients is I ask them, hey, tell me about your depression, right? Tell me about your symptoms. Are they worse when you get your period? Has it always been related to your period? Are there any other hormonal symptoms going on? Let's talk about your diet. Let's talk about fatigue. Is depression manifesting to you as just exhaustion, or is it more apathy, or is it more anger, or is it more anxiety? When did it start? Where does it come from? What situations trigger it? And based on all of that, I created this essential oil guide, which is, from what I've seen so far, when people struggle with depression as a result of some hormonal issues coming up, there's certain essential oils that work better for that, right? And when people struggle with depression as a result of, let's say, motivation, or when depression is coming up or depressive symptoms are coming up as really just pure exhaustion because you're just overwhelmed and your whole body is shutting down, you would use different essential oils for that, right? So what I did was I put together this essential oils guide, which is saying, hey, like, depression is not a one fixed thing. You have to, there's biochemical individuality, plus everyone has a different experience of depression. So here's all these different mixes that I use for PMS versus motivation versus, exhaustion versus anxiety for this and this. Here's the recipes I use. Here's why these herbs tend to work. Here's the studies that back it up. But by the way, your body's still going to be different. So start with these and then play around based on listening to your body, based on listening to the quality of your thoughts, the speed of your brain. Notice how that makes you sleep. Notice all of these different kinds of things. Notice your level of compassion through a day, patience through a day, all that kind of stuff, and then play, right? So my guide is this really great starting off point for different kind of forms and manifestations of depression. But again, I'll always tell people that if you want to be able to really heal your depression, but in a way that's going to lead to greater fulfillment, greater happiness than you could have ever known, greater joy, greater connection, greater wisdom, then take these as a starting off point and start to play around with some of the oils that are already starting to bring you relief. So if you guys would like that essential oils for depression kind of kickoff guide, just send me a comment on this and I will send it to you guys. I'll send you guys the link as a messenger feed or in a private message. Yeah, I'm getting better at this Facebook link rhetoric and stuff. But yeah, so that was all I really wanted to say, is when it comes to dealing with not just depression, but any experience that you have as a difficult emotion, meet that with, hey, this is a sign that my life is unaligned in some way. All right, Amy, awesome. I'll send you the guide. I'll send it over to you right away, right? So this is a signal that my life is unaligned in some way, right? And maybe it's because of my environment, maybe it's my lifestyle. And environment, again, that can mean like you're around toxic people, but it could also mean you're around toxic chemicals all the time and you need to, like detox your body from all that. Maybe it means that you have some micronutrients that are missing and you need some of that. Or maybe it means that you need to bring down some stress hormones in your body, right? Like cortisol. And that was a huge part when I got depressed when I was, about 28. Some of my depressive symptoms started coming back. And that time it wasn't to do with vitamin D, vitamin B, because that was fixed. It was a completely hormonal game. And so I had to treat that differently. And again, thank God I knew to treat my depression as a map that time and not as a diagnosis, because guess what my gynecologist and my psychologist wanted to do? They just wanted to put me right back on to antidepressants, right? So maybe it's a hormone thing, maybe it's a relationship thing, whatever, maybe it's a trauma that you haven't really dealt with yet, and it's really kind of giving you the bill now after you've lodged it deep down in your body for the first time, for many, many years. So whatever it is, all right, Olivia and Tel, thank you guys so much. I will send you as soon as I'm done with the live, I'll private message you guys as well with the essential oils guide, and you guys can all follow up with me as well and let me know what's working for you and where you're confused and if you have questions. Because I love integrating that information and kind of crowdsourcing everything I hear from my clients and my community into spreading the knowledge even further about how we can start to heal ourselves and use playful approaches to natural ways of healing in order to start to bring even greater clarity into our lives and our minds and our bodies. So that is it. All right, Jackie, awesome. I'll send it to you too. And anybody else who's watching the replay, feel free to comment. I will come back. I love reading your comments, so I definitely will come back and send that to you guys also. But yes, thanks so much for listening. Your anger, your depression, your sadness, your anxiety, all of it is a map of telling you there's something unaligned in your life. And that when you find that unalignment, when you find that misalignment, you can listen to it in terms of what you really need to be the most fulfilled, happy, healthy person. And when you start to go down that path, it's going to lead to more fulfillment, more self-awareness, more self-love, and just more kind of appreciation of this very difficult experience than you would ever otherwise have. So I really wish you guys tons of luck and love on your healing journey, and I will send all of you who commented a link with the Essential Oils Guide now. All right, guys, lots of love, and have a beautiful weekend. Mwah!